Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jay Willis, senior contributor to the appeal on the Supreme Court ruling that protects the employment rights of LGBT folks. Meanwhile, 9 states hit record COVID highs, and Vice President Mike Pence says it's nothing. Judge denies Oklahoman's attempt to stop Trump's indoor rally / COVID party on Saturday. And Joe Biden is widening his polling lead as Trump's approval sinks. Meanwhile, 20 Indian soldiers die in a clash with Chinese soldiers. The first deadly clash between those two nations in 45 years. Very 2020 of them. Meanwhile, Barbara Lee introduces a plan to cut $350 billion from the Pentagon. Donald Trump announces he may sue his niece. And the DOJ actually sues John Bolton, both for books that purport to tell things Donald Trump doesn't want known. The governor of Iowa will restore felon voting rights, particularly relevant as Iowa has now become a swing state again. 2 Boogaloo boys charged in the Oakland federal officer killing that was initially reported as part of the ongoing uprisings. Meanwhile, that 75-year-old victim of Buffalo police brutality has a fractured skull and cannot walk. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. I hope everybody is doing well. It's another Wednesday. Here we are, and we're just watching the really sort of it is just stunning to watch what's happening with the coronavirus outbreaks in places like Florida and Texas and Arizona. There's actually 9 states, I think it is, that are having outbreaks. Here it is: Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Nevada, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, and Texas. They either reported new single-day highs for coronavirus cases or a record for 7-day new coronavirus cases in terms of an average over those 7 days. That's according to the Washington Post. As you know, at least 115,000 people in the U.S. have died of coronavirus. There have been more than 2.1 million cases reported. And, you know, we still, when we look at the national numbers, it looks like it's stable, because what has been happening is that New York, which was a massive, obviously the epicenter, I mean, arguably, well, not arguably, I mean, for the world, had the biggest hotspot, was the biggest hotspot. As those numbers continue to go down, I think largely because people understand what the worst of it looks like in this area of the country, the Northeast in particular. So people are wearing masks when they go out. They are trying to maintain social distance. Apparently, what I'm reading now is that 20 and 30-year-olds going to bars is right now, aside from obviously like nursing homes are probably a little more protected than they were at the beginning of this thing. Meat processing plants and churches still remain places where you see clusters, but the other transmission is coming from people going to bars in their 20s and 30s. And in Arizona, you have a situation where there's at least one hospital that's saying that they have only one more ICU bed. People at the emergency rooms are starting to say, like, this is, we're seeing the wave now that we didn't see before. The increase in hospitalizations and ICU and ventilator usage is what apparently is really troubling for people in Arizona. In Texas, Governor Abbott is starting to sound a little bit more cautious about things. Nothing to worry about, but people really got to pay attention. It's not so much we got to let the old people die anymore. We're not hearing that as much in Texas. In Florida, you're starting to see more reports, and we're still at the front end of this wave that is continuing in these places around the country. And we still have massive questions about things like transmission, about how many people suffer from, survive, but then live with the implications of COVID. And what are those? Dialysis, maybe there's kidney failure, other problems. We don't know for sure if the infection rates are declining and where and under what circumstances. We don't have a sense of how much immunity you get if you've had it. We don't have a sense of do other coronaviruses, as opposed to the COVID-19, has that made people immune? We're not even sure about if you are asymptomatic, are you more or less, as opposed to pre-symptomatic, able to transmit it? We're not really sure about kids. There's a lot of questions that we have. And part of the reason why I think these questions haven't been answered is because the federal government has completely abdicated its role. I mean, are they even doing press conferences now? Brendan, do you ever come across even a press conference from anybody at Health and Human Services saying, this is how many people we are at 116,000 deaths or new cases? There doesn't seem to be any sort of awareness that North Carolina, say, or Texas, say, or Arizona, say, or Florida is not like Australia or New Zealand. They're connected to the rest of the country. You can just drive or walk across the border of these places. And there doesn't seem to be any concerted effort to deal with this whatsoever. And it's just sort of a Mike Pence. The only, in fact, federal response that we're seeing is Mike Pence writing an op-ed saying, we got no problems with this, mission accomplished. We just got a little bit of it here and there, little sprinklings, not going to be a problem. So in this total absence of a federal response to the coronavirus, it creates a vacuum. And for people and locations that have not experienced the worst of it, there is an overconfidence, and this is not something that you can go back 2 or 3 weeks ago and change. In other words, the die is cast. What's going to happen today was written 2 to 3 weeks ago. What's going to happen from a month of today is written today. So, again, with the absence of like any type of concerted national effort to deal with this, you get idiots like, what's his name? Aubrey Huff. He's a
former baseball player.
Yeah, he played for a bunch of teams, didn't he?
Yeah.
Tampa Bay, I think Detroit, maybe
Orioles.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
He was a journeyman. You know what that tells me? A-hole. Nobody liked him on the team. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's not hard to believe. Apparently, he tweeted out something a day or two ago saying something like, "I'm not going to wear my mask." And then he got upset because people responded to him. And so he did this video with the title, "Take your coronavirus mask and stick it where the sun don't shine." That's a very clever saying that, I think was made most famous probably 50, 60 years ago. Now, the irony of that is that one of the things you got to be careful of is, in fact, public restrooms, because fecal matter can be aerialized and when it's flushed, and you can catch it that way. So not necessarily the worst idea to stick your coronavirus mask where the sun don't shine, but you also still need one on your face. But here is Aubrey Huff explaining why he doesn't need it.
I posted a tweet yesterday about no longer willing to comply for wearing a mask inside a grocery store. And the liberal left, the soy boy professors and the blue checkmark crazy cat ladies were in unison guilt shaming me for threatening the lives of millions of innocent people.
Pause it for a second. I just want to make it clear. I'm not going to guilt shame him, whatever that means. What is guilt shame? I make him feel bad because he's feeling guilty? No, I'm going to mock him because he's an idiot. But continue.
Blue checkmark crazy cat ladies were in unison guilt shaming me for threatening the lives of millions of innocent people. Now, if you want to wear a mask and live in fear the rest of your life, it's certainly your prerogative, but the vast majority of well-adjusted, sane, common sense people that aren't sheep, that can reason for themselves, agree with me. I understand the coronavirus is real. And if you have pre-existing conditions or you're an old person, and I know this sounds insensitive, but somebody has to say it, you are morbidly obese, then stay the fuck home. Just because that is your plight in life doesn't mean the whole world has to shut down. You know, I was at the grocery store today, and the two ladies that were checking me out were wearing these masks. And I love to make people like that smile and laugh and have a great conversation. You couldn't even see the wrinkles in their eyes with their smiles. They looked so beat down and run down. This is not a selfish thing for me. This is a thing for me to try and free Americans so they can freely breathe. It's not healthy to breathe in your own CO2 all the time. And it seems like everybody's a coronavirus expert. Listen, if I, God forbid, get the coronavirus, guess what I do? I go home, I get well, and I go back and live my life. I would rather do that. Hell, I would rather die from coronavirus than to live the rest of my life in fear and wearing a damn mask.
So there's a couple of things here. The too long don't read is he's not very bright guy. The other version is just that we see this tribalism is so intense that, first off, Nobody's suggesting that you wear a mask all the time. It is really when you go out in public, particularly people that you don't know, people that you don't have a sense of where they've been. The real concern is that when people are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, they're not aware that they're sick with COVID, so they don't go home and stay indoors and not infect other people. Nobody's suggesting that you wear a mask for the rest of your life either. At one point, this will end. But just because we can't pick a date, a grown man should be able to wrap their heads around the concept that just because we can't say this is going to be over on July 7th, 2020, doesn't mean that it's going to go on for the rest of their life. I mean, that is literally a conversation I've had to have with my 7-year-old son. And frankly, he gets it. But the idea that this guy is saying that we need to stop having masks because I can't see the ladies at the checkout counter smile at me is pretty rich. And of course, this genius, for whatever reason, thinks that if you wear a mask at the supermarket, then you're sucking in your own CO2 all the time. Why doesn't he rush over to the hospital where these medical professionals are wearing masks all day at work and tell them of this new thing that he's found out about CO2? And maybe he can do like some dancing and joking around in front of all the medical professionals so they can laugh. And maybe for his sake, they can all draw smiley faces on their masks so he feels better about it. The idea that this has become some type of cultural signifier and that I am a soy boy because I have read all of the research that suggests masks cut down the transmission rate significantly it's just bizarre. But he's a loser. He must be, I don't know. Is he, I mean, what do you think he's probably trying to launch some type of YouTube thing, or is he just trying to get on to OWN, or what is it? What's going on with that?
I think he's had something of a AM talk radio, he fills in sometimes. I think
is that right?
To launch that, culture warrior post-career thing. Yeah.
Nice. Where is what's his face? Who was
Travis?
On the Sox? Where was coming out of Tampa Bay? He came from Tampa Bay as well, too, didn't he? The guy from Rhode Island. I can't even remember his name now. I've had to block him out. He had the bloody sock.
Curt Schilling.
Yeah, Curt Schilling. Hey. Well,
I don't know where he's been actually.
There you go, folks. All right, we're going to take a quick break and move on to another topic. When we come back, we'll be talking to Jay Willis. He's a senior contributor at The Appeal. We're going to talk about that ruling from the Supreme Court just on Monday and about some of the other ones we might anticipate. Quick break. Be right back after this. is your support that makes this show possible. You can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. And also, don't forget, on Friday, or maybe for the first time you're hearing this, we are having a little bit less than casual Friday. AOC will be joining us in anticipation of her primary that will be taking place next Tuesday in New York. So set your, I don't know, whatever it is you set to listen to the program. Meanwhile, on the phone, pleasure to welcome to the program senior contributor to The Appeal, Jay Willis. Jay, welcome to the program.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
So, all right, let's this ruling on Monday regarding the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a bit of a surprise. Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion. It was a 6-3 decision. It basically says that for the first time, that this the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects people's right to not be discriminated or fired in an employee-employer relationship based upon being gay or transgender. Tell us about how Gorsuch got to this opinion.
Yeah, it's a deeply weird opinion because the, how do I want to put this? It is, as you note, like absolutely not the result that people anticipated. I certainly thought this was going to go the other way, that it would be a fairly straightforward 5-4 opinion with this conservative court ruling sort of against this, what is a remarkable expansion of LGBTQ rights. But Justice Gorsuch treats it as a very simple issue, and he offers several versions of the same hypothetical. He says, if you were to fire a man for dating a man, but you wouldn't fire a similarly situated woman for dating a man, that's discrimination based on sex. He says it's inextricably bound up in sex. And he summarizes his argument nicely when he says, these cases involve no more than the straightforward application of legal terms with plain and settled meaning. He treats it as a very textualist argument. And the dissents, and they are robust dissents. This decision is almost 170 pages long. 140 of those are dissents from Justice Alito and Justice Kavanaugh. They go into a lot of detail to argue that the legislators who drafted this, they would not have thought that the term sex encompassed sexual orientation. They talk a lot about legislative history, legislative intent, things that purportedly textualist judges usually don't like to turn to when they're interpreting statutes. But
now let me ask you this.
By contrast,
let me ask you this. Well, we may be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. So let me just put a flag there so that people remember what you've just said, that textualists don't look to legislative intent. And you know, I'm skeptical, and we will get to this point about just the whole concept of being a textualist and all this, original intent and all of these sort of theories that have been propagated by conservative jurists, because ultimately they seem to find their way generally to where they want to get to. So let's just put a pin in the dissents and just talk about for 1 second, like what. The implications of this are in terms of, and I don't think most people knew this, but in more than half the states as of 5 days ago, if you were gay and your employer decided to fire you, they could just fire you because you were gay.
Yep.
You wrote about you wrote about doing intake as a, I guess maybe a paralegal or working in a law firm. Tell that story, because I saw that on your Twitter feed, and I think people will find that interesting.
Yeah, of course. So, as you note, about half of the states don't have their own civil rights laws that protect LGBTQ people from discrimination. So what this results is, until yesterday, is this really messy patchwork of legal protections where if you're fired because you're trans or you're gay, whether you have legal recourse depends on not on what actually happened to you, but where you happen to live and work. So the way this plays out in practice, I used to work at an employment discrimination firm doing case intake. This was before I went to law school. So my job was hearing people tell me, a stranger, about basically the worst things that ever happened to them, right? And what this means is that as they're telling me their story, they tell me where they work. And in my head, I can already think, oh, you live in a state that doesn't protect you. And before they can even tell me everything, I know in my head that I'm going to have to call them in a couple of days and say, I'm really sorry, we can't represent you in this matter. Best of luck. It's a deeply unfair status quo. It's very arbitrary in the way it's applied, and I'm really glad to see the court close this loophole with this case.
Okay, and so what happens? So in the context of employment discrimination, you can no longer fire someone because they're gay or because they're trans, and so. But what happens? I mean, we have this language. We have the same language in Section 8, right? With housing discrimination. Is housing discrimination now also off the table, or do we have to wait for a specific challenge to someone being denied, an apartment or denied housing because they're gay or trans?
Yeah, we've got to wait for a challenge to come, but you're right. The result certainly seems inevitable or to flow naturally from this. Justice Alito's dissent lists more than 100 statutes that prohibit discrimination based on sex. And his point is that all of those, under the Supreme Court's logic, could now include discrimination, could now prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and trans status. Of course, he's saying that as if it is a bad thing. But yes, this could have sweeping implications for other civil rights statutes that weren't specifically part of the court's opinion yesterday.
Now, let me ask you this. Let's say just hypothetically, I bring a case, of housing discrimination or other discrimination under one of those statutes that Alito cites. When I write the brief and submit it to the court, can I cite even Judge Alito, who didn't agree with this decision, concedes that in this instance, it would apply under this statute?
For all intents and purposes, yeah. So the opinion in Title VII in this Bostock case was a statutory case, not a constitutional case. But the constitutional implications of this are, as we've said, pretty apparent. So yeah, if I were writing a brief in this case, I would point out that this result suggests that the Supreme Court is going to apply this sort of heightened intermediate scrutiny to laws that allow for discrimination based on sexual orientation. You will certainly see this come up in a lot of briefs in other civil rights statutes in the years to come.
Okay, so I want to talk about the relevance of Gorsuch writing this, the majority opinion, both in the context of the implications for textualism as it's applied to other cases in the future, but also in terms of, I think there's about 6 other major decisions that are happening this week that are going to be amongst the most controversial. Trump financial records, the DACA decision, a Louisiana trap law, which would inhibit a woman's right to choose, a case on faithless electors, one involving religious exemption to discrimination cases, and one about the constitutionality of having a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that does not derive its funding from Congress each year. So give me a sense, like, how much of this is John Roberts going like, okay, this is the way that we're going to release this. We're going to set the table saying that we are not partisan and that we're not coming to conclusions, and we're going to give them this one. And Gorsuch will be even like create his bona fides by writing the opinion, and then the next couple are really going to be ones that it's going to soften the criticism that were partisan. Like how much does that happen, do you think?
That's a great question. I don't really know how much the order of the release of opinions factors into the justice's decision-making process. But you're right that there's no reason necessarily to look to this opinion as sort of a predictor of how these other controversial cases will come down. This may be the sort of thing that we look back on in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and we say, "Boy, remember when the Supreme Court did that good thing? Those were the good old days." Right.
All right. Well, let's talk about the dissent and this piece that Joe Patrice wrote that you had linked to on your Twitter feed the other day, because I see something like this and my first instinct is like, oh boy, this is they're setting something else up here. And you were starting to talk about the dissent that Alito wrote and said that it was, is it your assessment that it's weird that Alito is talking about legislative intent because he's a textualist, or is it just are we watching a dance between Gorsuch and Alito where they're setting up a sort of almost a black box that is going to allow them to come to certain conclusions in the future?
Yeah, it really is sort of a mask-off moment for originalism, which, you alluded to this earlier, and I share your perspective that originalism and textualism, these aren't, superior necessarily tools for interpreting law and interpreting the Constitution. They're tools for conservative Republican judges to arrive at their preferred policy outcomes, which again is why it's so weird for Justice Gorsuch to be issuing this very narrow opinion that sort of claims the mantle of textualism, but leads to this opposite outcome. And it's sort of interesting, like Alito isn't wrong that the legislators who drafted this in the 1960s probably weren't thinking about sexual orientation as being part of sex. But Justice Gorsuch retort is that, we just go off the text here, and the text is really clear. There's this idea that the court isn't supposed to look for elephants in mouse holes, that it doesn't elicit sweeping policy changes based on, vagaries or stretches of definitions or things like that. And Gorsuch addresses that in his majority opinion. He says, this elephant was never hidden in a mouse hole. It has been standing before us all along. But what he sort of omits is that the end of that sentence, which is, and also we just saw this elephant for the first time after 50 years, where for the first time, more than 50 years, we're saying that for the first time, yes, sex includes sexual orientation. And it's something that he sort of just glides over. And I think that's the reason Justice Alito is pretty mad about it.
And so, but is Alito in some way also sort of like edifying this concept of the word sex? Yes. I'm almost like confused by it. Like he's not looking at the intent of the word. He's just simply saying that and he's really talking about the gender, right? I mean, sex as gender. If a man dates a man, the fact that the but for is that he's not a woman in terms of why he was fired, and therefore it is about sex. How does that work with transgender?
I mean, I think it's a version of the same syllogism, right? That if you are treating a trans woman differently than you would a woman who is presenting as her biological gender, that is discrimination based on sex. I think the simplicity of it is something that Alito can't really wrap his head around, doesn't have a great retort for, which is why he goes into, this long dissent with this long parade of horribles about what he sees as the result of this. It's a straight Fox News culture wars list, right? He talks about, locker rooms and discrimination in sports and, gendered sports, bathrooms, that sort of thing. But he's throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
All right, so let's talk about this concern about what it means for something like the Chevron doctrine. I think, hopefully, we certainly have talked about the Chevron doctrine quite a bit over the past, well, I guess 3 or 4 years in the context of there seems to be a move to return to the Lochner era and to basically, well, why don't you start by telling us what the Chevron doctrine is and why something like Gorsuch's opinion here implicates the Chevron doctrine?
Yeah, so the Chevron doctrine basically says that when an administrative agency issues an interpretation of a vague federal law, the judges defer to the experts, as long as it's reasonable and as long as Congress in the law hadn't said anything that sort of directly contravenes the administrative agency. So what you could see in this case is, Justice Gorsuch is very careful about, he says this is just based on the text, this is a narrow ruling, this is a narrow opinion. And I think you could see that come up in future Chevron cases about administrative decisions. And administrative agencies, they have tremendous power to interpret federal law, environmental statutes, for example, the Clean Air, the Clean Water Act. And you can see this sort of language and this sort of approach coming back in a conservative opinion that says, well, the statutes, the Clean Water Act, it doesn't contemplate these sweeping federal regulations. They're too far beyond the bounds of the text, and so we have decided that they are not reasonable.
Okay, so I want to get a little more concrete so that people can really understand this dynamic here. So, what happens is with like an EPA, Congress in whatever it is in 2012, let's say just 2008, is just not aware of every single chemical that could be dumped into a waterway. It's not aware of every possible waterway that could in some way, implicate the quality of water in sort of major waterways. And so they give a broad, basically a broad agenda to the EPA. Make sure the water's clean and not, unhealthy. And as science progresses, there becomes awareness that, hey, like this chemical is bad for human beings. And instead of Congress rewriting the laws to include a specific chemical, courts have found that the EPA has the right to say this chemical is unhealthy and it should be outlawed. But according to Gorsuch, because the law does not say blank chemical, therefore, as a textualist, then you cannot presume that the law includes that chemical, and therefore it is incumbent upon Congress to write a specific law, if that's what they want to do, and use the word, blank chemical. I should have probably come up with a fake name of a chemical, but that's basic. That's basically it, right?
Right. Like the process of passing legislation would obviously be really unwieldy, probably impossible in today's environment, if Congress had to list out every single hazardous chemical that is covered under an environmental statute. So it says, it'll issue a law that says, as you say, keep the waters clean, don't dump bad stuff in it. And then the EPA, which is a little bit more flexible, gets to determine what bad stuff is. And you can sort of look at the Bostock opinion as like an edge case. In this case, Justice Gorsuch feels that, the text is clear enough that he doesn't have to sort of strike it down. But in a similar case that comes before him, he could say, look, this, in an environmental case that you mentioned, this EPA interpretation of what hazardous chemicals mean is just too broad. It's beyond the scope of the statute. And so Exxon, you can dump whatever you want into the ocean.
And he's got to make that argument about this not being a elephant in a mouse hole, but rather an elephant that's been in front of us all the time. It's been like very, very obvious, even though no court had found it obvious for, since 1964. He's got to make that argument because he's really arguing that Gorsuch is a textualist there. And so rather than saying that, like, I'm divining now this dynamic, he's got to say it's been obvious that it's there the whole time, and I'm just a guy who approaches things that are obvious.
Right. Chevron deference has been around for a long time. It's a really important concept in the law because it's what allows the government to respond flexibly to problems that come up after Congress passes laws that the legislators couldn't have envisioned at the time. So rolling back Chevron deference is going to would be a seismic event for the law. And so, yeah, Justice Gorsuch could here be setting up an opinion in which he one day says, look, like, I'm sorry, this seems like such a big deal, but we never should have gotten to this point in the first place.
And so do you think there are chances that Gorsuch and others are going to be referring to this case as a means in which to essentially dismantle large parts of our regulatory scheme going forward, because our regulatory scheme is based upon this dynamic of Congress looking to these agencies and saying, you're the scientists, you're the experts. Here's our general goal that we want to hit. You guys figure out the way to get there.
Yeah, and I think you can see an analog to this in Chief Justice Roberts' opinion in the 2012 decision that surprisingly upheld the Affordable Care Act. But what he did in that opinion is he upheld it on the basis that requiring people to buy health insurance is within Congress's taxing power. But he also went out of his way to say, look, this is not a legitimate exercise of Congress's commerce power, which is the power on basically which all meaningful, relevant congressional statutes rely. And you're likely to see that opinion come up, if Congress were in the future to say, pass a Green New Deal or Medicare for all, you're likely to, relying on the Commerce Clause. That opinion could come back and Chief Justice Roberts could say, we said in 2012, we sort of limited the scope of the Commerce Clause. And I think you could see the same dynamic here.
Where the sort of, I guess the backswing is becomes actually the, everything becomes inverted. All the things that they were attempting, to promote what appears to be a positive, and I want to make it clear, obviously, this is a hugely positive ruling, but the mechanism which they used, they're basically building a machine to attack a lot of other things that those in the center and the left appreciate, I think, of our government.
Yeah, the application in this case is, discrimination is bad. I feel like that is beyond stating the obvious. And the application in this case, the result in this case is absolutely good. What you could see in the future, though, is the same, the principles that the court used to arrive at this decision being applied in other contexts to have very bad results.
Jay Willis, a senior contributor to The Appeal, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about this. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, folks. I'm going to head into the fun half. Do we have Michael with us? Michael is going to be joining us in the fun half. Isn't that right, guys?
He's not yet.
He's not here yet. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. But we will head into the fun half. Hopefully he will make his way over there when we do. Again, check us out on Friday. AOC will be on the show. She goes on podcasts regularly, doesn't she? She been on other shows?
I don't know.
Let's say no.
Yeah,
as cool as ours.
Maybe not. It's exciting. I'm excited about it.
I don't think she's been on Rogan.
I'm pretty sure she has.
Well, there you go. I'm glad I got there first. Screw Rogan. He's going. And when is Rogan going to Spotify? When does that happen? This $100 million deal.
Not soon enough.
Folks, don't forget also you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Today is Wednesday. Last night was Tuesday. On TMBS, my understanding is that Noam Chomsky showed up.
Yeah,
in studio?
No, not in studio. From Arizona. But Medina Toure walked us through Blasio's budget.
You're breaking up, Matt. You're not.
And then, yeah, Noam.
I can't hear you. But Noam Chomsky on TMBS. Check that out. You can go to youtube.com/The Michael Brooks Show, patreon.com/TMBS to check that out. Don't forget, check out Nomi Show, The Nomiki Show on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show and on youtube.com, The Nomiki Show. Also, The Antifada, patreon.com/The Antifada. They got a bunch of content up there as well. And Matt, apparently his internet only works when he does Literary Hangovers Twitch stream.
I have to knock down the rate on that too. Twitch.tv/literary.
Twitch.com, I think, /literary hangover is what Matt was trying to say. All right, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half right after. I remind you that an Embark breed and health test is the key to unlocking your dog's unique breed mix and genetically informed health needs. It can identify over 350 breeds, types, and varieties and screen for over 175 genetic health conditions. Remember, Kelly did this with her dog, Edie. And what does it do? It helps provide the best medical care for your dog. Go to embarkvet.com now and use promo code majority to get $50 off your dog breed and health kit. That's embarkvet.com with code majority for $50 off your dog breed and health kit. All right, quick break, and then we'll head to the fun half. See you there. 646-257-3920. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
It's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2, 5 8s, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But damn, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Michael's here.
Sam.
Welcome to the fun half, everyone. Michael, so how was Noam Chomsky last night?
It was great. I mean, I gotta say, man, Lulak, Cornel West, Chomsky, hitting some interviews I wanted to do for a long time.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's
but he was. I think he definitely, I would say he perked up a couple of minutes in. It's really interesting rhetorically how, he has that sort of very slow, methodical, precise speaking style, and then he injects very, I would almost say like inflammatory occasionally, and then methodically backs it up. So Trump came up and he's just like, well, he's the greatest criminal in human history. And that sounds extreme, but I'll explain it. And he did. And he's probably right.
What did he say? What did he say?
I mean, he basically said that to actively work to make the planet uninhabitable at the scale that Trump is doing, and by extent, he mentioned McConnell too, obviously, is if the project of
like
climate change,
project, right?
Climate change and arms control. Well, he's also said the Republican Party is like the most dangerous organization on the planet. So if climate change and what Trump is doing, I was very happy because we started to cover a lot of what Trump is doing to arms control on the show.
Yeah.
That basically, if he achieves those things, then the earth becomes essentially uninhabitable. And that translates to, in its totality, the greatest crime in human history. So
it's funny. I'm obviously, I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I'm going to go back and watch it. But I've been sitting with a story of Trump from the Atomic Bulletin.
Oh God!
Of Trump wanting to, of the danger involved in Trump wanting to resume nuclear testing.
Yep.
And I don't want to introduce, but one of the things that has been annoying me is like when the Atomic Bulletin has been cited, in what context, and not particularly. I mean, on this show, like we had Greenwald on and was telling me that the biggest problem with the Russiagate was that it moved the Atomic Bulletin clock to 2 minutes. And then there's just this silence of like, well, also, what also is problematic is that Donald Trump is wants to resume testing. That may be also a problem.
Well, and that was actually another great thing about the last plug for the interview. We talked about speech. We talked about the protests. We covered a lot. We talked about Lula. But the other thing, I think he did a uniquely good job at threading the needle that apparently a lot of people don't seem to be able to thread for whatever reason, frankly, on both sides, of talking about how Donald Trump is the product of capitalism, neoliberalism, and bigger structure. And if you don't deal with bigger structure, then we're done. And you can't just have a melodrama about him as a person. And also that, you can be on the radical left and still be totally concerned about the inspector generals, not
right.
Because you're concerned about the aesthetics of it or how Trump tweets about it, the fun stuff, but because that is an aggressive undermining of, what little remains of our institutional arrangements. And that, certainly reflects how I think. And the way he threaded it together was very good.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to have that regardless of, Joe Biden's not going to feel too bound to like, well, I'm not going to operate with my inspector generals that way. I mean, I maybe, you know, or at the very least, it is a loosening of a constraint that, regardless of what you think of, whoever the next president is not going to have that constraint anymore. If
it's always a dynamic.
Not use it. Yes.
We've seen that.
That went with what Obama did to Trump. It went with what Bush did to Obama, et cetera, et cetera. So
the Biden administration will just like codify that inspector generals can be fired at whim. It's like make it like create some like formal bureaucratic process around it that will reflect the Obama style.
Here is Donald Trump. Let's get into to some of the news. Donald Trump announced the other day that both a loophole and he doesn't. There's no. I mean, I suppose he could ban chokeholds with federal officers, but all he can do is really suggest. Or, I mean, if you really wanted to, they're legislatively, you could withhold funding to police departments if chokeholds are not banned. But here he is making it seem like he's banning chokeholds, but also leaving one big sort of giant gaping loophole. Let's see if you can find what that is.
For example, many believe that proper training might have prevented the tragic deaths of Antoine Rose and Botham Jean. As part of this new credentialing process, chokeholds will be banned, except if an officer's life is at risk. And I will say we've dealt with all of the various departments, and everybody said, it's time. We have to do it. Additionally, we're looking at new advanced and powerful, less lethal weapons to help prevent deadly interactions. New devices are being developed all the time, and we're looking at the best of them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when tasers were brought in as that new non-lethal thing, and it just ended up becoming basically a torture device. But that aside, how do we determine whether a police officer's life is in danger? Well, the police officer does. And that is exactly the standard now that allows them to fire their weapon.
Right.
They get to choose.
And chokeholds were banned in New York City when Eric Garner was murdered. If I believe they were already off the table here officially. I don't understand. This is a very, maybe I don't want to get into a small point, but like how physically are you in danger if you physically are in a position to put someone in a chokehold? How does that even make like literal physiological sense? I don't understand what?
Right. If you have that type of control over somebody, how can you argue that you are threatened? And I guess the argument is like, you never know.
Well, that is always the argument.
Right.
Right. Like that you never know. I mean, I think one of the things, and we'll see, there's so many different aspects that are spilling out from these protests, but something that is very encouraging and very important is that, as people always say, like Minneapolis, hey, they did all this stuff. They did the sweeping kind of basic reform packages several years ago. It has not solved the problem. And, America across the board, I always want to remind people of this. Absolutely as an example, like the numbers in Chicago in terms of the just it's not mind blowing. More and more people are recognizing this, but the aggressive racism of policing in Chicago, like something like 70% of shooting fatalities are African-Americans, 70% of stops are African-Americans. Then you can actually expand it across the country, and you can start including as I always say, that some of the highest places of police fatalities are Alaska, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. And that, obviously brings the class dimension into it. And the reason I point this out is that number one of the things that's been amazing about these protests is they're taking place everywhere, across the country. And second, I think people are not willing to be satisfied with, sure, yeah, ban chokeholds. You should. If I was in Congress, I'd vote for that. But that's not what we're talking about here.
Right. It has to be far more.
Yes, it has to be way more systemic and aggressive.
And just restructuring. In Hudson, New York, cut the police budget by 10%, not hiring any more officers. Albuquerque, increasing the police budget, but also creating an apparatus to deal with unhoused folks and folks dealing with mental issues. That hopefully what it does is it leads to like less reason to have a bigger police budget as you go forward. I mean, I
absolutely, who
knows the mechanisms in which it would take to get there, but sometimes I think creating alternate entities to begin to alleviate parts of that police portfolio is your first step to actually shrinking the budgets for these for the police departments. But
I agree completely, because I think
not leaving the police department is a good thing in that respect.
I completely agree with that, because I do think the overall problem here is that the police are assigned to terrorize and monitor and otherwise surveil the populations that we've decided that we're going to discard in the modern, in the economy. So I mean, literally, it's a direct answer by starting to say the answer here is things like housing. I also want to say, I mean, Shama Sawant is putting some very material, concrete things on the ground in Seattle, including working like ban tear gas, which seems pretty obvious. And that one, I think her work there is also really significant. Did you ever read or watch Men Who Stare at Goats?
No.
Very bizarre. It's a good book. I mean, it's true. It's like about basically all of these. The kind of comedic part is this deep interest in the Pentagon and in the intelligence community and like New Age warfare in the 70s and 80s. So there's like Pentagon guys trying to like run through walls and stuff. And on the other, and then maybe some stuff that, I think it's cool if everybody meditates or whatever. But there's this whole other line of it, of these guys studying, like they were studying non-lethal warfare, basically. And the concrete stuff all of a sudden that this New Age thing translated to was a whole bunch of incredibly brutal crowd control weapons that are deployed. Sound, shots,
and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it actually turned into very real, and there's a big private security industry business with that stuff as well. So I thought of that with made me think of that. But basically just how some of these technical fixes can, it's like,
Are you aware of what's going on though with, I mean, I know we've talked about the Kurds, particularly the Syrian Kurds, quite a bit here. Are you and what's going on in Rojava, and are you aware of just how much those folks in Rojava are influencing the protesters in this country, Michael?
I mean, I've heard a bit.
Here,
it's very hard to track.
Get ready to have your well, maybe for you, but
maybe
not
for
for
me.
Glenn Beck.
Oh, okay. Glenn Beck is going to occur. Okay,
here we go.
This is incredible, especially if you've been watching our specials. That reminds me of what was happening in Ukraine and how the United States, by funding a project with George Soros, was teaching these things to the radicals. This is well coordinated and taught. And again, last week's special on TV showed you this new group out of Syria that has been training revolutionaries here in America to help topple America. It's actually the Kurds of Syria, not to be confused with the northern Iraqi Kurds. Those are good guys. These are Marxist revolutionaries, and they intend on toppling America, and they are training people here. And I believe, and I have no evidence of this except in foreign countries,
right,
that the allies of Soros, perhaps Soros funded himself, are training these people as well. He said that he felt that the government had really abandoned him. Now, I want you to listen. First of all, when he said, I heard them scream, kill yourself, he said, it was like the devil. Evil is on a rampage. Evil believes it can win.
You know,
I didn't get the last part.
2010 called and said, hey, Glenn, how did you get so far ahead of me? Essentially.
Did he wear stuff like that in 2010? That looks like something.
No,
looks
he
like
had
a Star Wars bar
look,
outfit there.
Slightly different look, but he has really returned to form, right? I mean, he is just, if he had, I think, a little bit more energy, he'd have the blackboard back. And he is talking about evil, and he's talking about Soros, and he's talking about in Rojava, where they are helping us, I guess, presumably, or I don't know whom, to topple the United States government, which, of course, everybody can see the progress going quite well.
It's going quite well. It's
very well. We may have expanded the Progressive Caucus by, half a dozen members in the House.
Like first, you do a little bit of farming in Seattle for a couple of days. Then Jamal Bowman might beat Elliot Engel, and then
exactly.
Boom.
And then here goes the American guy. I mean, honestly, at one point there should be we should see as much of an apology as we saw in a proclamation that Glenn Beck has changed. I mean, it's just really, where's the Times article of like, oops, we got this one wrong? Where's the New York Magazine article? Oops, we got this wrong. Where's the Samantha Bee special on, hey, missed the boat on that one?
You know what's so funny is I was always give Bob Garfield credit because on the media, he really seriously interrogated Beck. And what strikes me, especially with my sort of kick of actually we should be rooting for people to change and undergo evolution and so on, that if Glenn Beck it wasn't just that Garfield actually asked him the proper questions. It was that Beck threw a temper tantrum and finished the interview. That was the whole test right there, right? If Beck actually was like, no, I can answer some of this, I can deal with this, then that might have been that would have been the indication of oh, okay, that's potentially interesting. Everybody else just was like, oh, okay, you think Trump's a Bulgarian? Great. Let's just go roll with this.
Right. But here's the other, there's also like a option C, which is, who the F cares? Okay, you are no longer an incredibly toxic human being, and we're supposed to throw you a birthday party for that?
I think they were. Yeah, I think the strategy was, wasn't the whole obsession though? Was I think the thinking was that he was going to be like the down market never Trumper, basically.
Oh my God.
I mean, look, I think it's nonsense. I never, he wasn't.
But that's the thing that they don't understand. There's no such thing.
Right.
Absolutely. There's because a down market never Trump. I mean, first of all, the up market never Trumpers, they have no constituency.
Well, they do in the Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, but they don't. I mean, they're not bringing anybody new to the table. Let's put it that way.
Right.
They may have fans, but they're not bringing any constituency to the table. They're already at the table, and just because they're saying oh, can I sit next to you? That's great. But the down market, there is no down market never Trumpers because they get subsumed. They're immediately out. They're Justin Amoshed, if you will.
Right.
They're no longer relevant to anybody at that point.
Right.
I mean, I will say this about the never Trumpers. They make a good ad.
They make a good ad. They do make good ads. They do make good ads.
But I also, when I watch those ads from the Lincoln Group or whatever it is, you know what my first reaction is?
What?
Where the F is the Democratic Party? Are they not putting out ads? What?
I think that there's nothing the Democratic Party is more excited about than Republican ads that are mean to Trump. As far as though that connection goes, I don't know about the specifics of the conspiracy theory, but the part of what happened with the Kurds associated with Rojava is they got really into this guy Murray Bookchin, who is this Vermont kind of quasi-anarchist who had battles with Bernie in Burlington, which is hilarious. All of these like lefty Brooklyn. And so probably, some of his ideas on town meetings and autonomous zones are just remigrating back from the Kurds to some of the activism we see in Seattle. That's the more benign than there is a secret cabal funded by George Soros. I don't understand. George Soros is an old man. Jesus Christ.
Let's go to the phone. Calling from a 570 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Excuse me?
Hello?
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 Oh, hello. This is Jules from PA. How are you?
Good. How are you? What's on your mind?
I'm doing great. I was listening yesterday, and you brought up as like a sort of joke, like offhand comment, Paw Patrol. And it got me thinking, like, there's a lot of talk recently about media portrayals of the police and, Law and Order and Chicago PD and how this gives the public, a certain like favorable perspective of the police. But like, I feel like, not just with like shows like Paw Patrol, which are like a little bit more blatant, but even just like, any random show that doesn't necessarily have to be about the police, from like a young age, and maybe it's not even just the media, but also the way we like raise our kids. Children are taught to like have not even just like a favorable opinion of the police, but like a certain level of deference, right? So over time, by the time they're old enough to even watch Law and Order and Chicago PD and whatnot, they already have this sort of like subconscious trust for the police. So like it sort of makes them all the more susceptible to any sort of like propaganda efforts, whether it's on TV or otherwise, and like, give police officers the benefit of the doubt. So like, without sounding like, oh my gosh, we have to like, we need to have an overhaul on like all like information that we send to our kids, and like the like some kind of like how like people are like, we can't politicize the children, but like how do we make like kids more open to the idea that like, look, like the police aren't always there to just defend you and swoop in when there's an attacker. They're
all right, Jules,
they serve a different role in society.
I get your point. I mean, I think that, and I appreciate the call. I mean, I think that, frankly, I think to a certain extent, I think there is probably a racial disparity in terms of the way the kids are taught about the police in many respects. I think, frankly, broadly speaking, white kids are taught that if you have a problem, you go to the police. From what I understand, talking to black folk with kids, that's not what they do. They warn them that police can be dangerous, and I think, my sense is that by osmosis, I think police are kids rather are getting a different assessment. I mean, I know that my 7-year-old, I think, is aware that that police can be in circumstances also can be dangerous. But there's a police officer who sits at the front desk of my kid's elementary school, and she's very nice and friendly, and that she's not wearing a gun. And so, kids are, depending on how they're situated, have different perspectives on it. I mean, I don't know if Paw Patrol actually influences people's perspective on police. I mean, the fact is that there's only one police officer who's a little doggy who's a police officer. The others are firemen or like pilots or something like that. I can't really remember. So I'm not sure the Paw Patrol is this, but
do you like getting high and watching Paw Patrol?
I don't. I am so glad that we're past Paw Patrol right now.
I would just say, I think it's an interesting conversation, though, about, I mean, it's less established with police, although I think there's some connection that Alexandria Neeson and I talked about last week on Thursday, where she kind of did the history of sort of press deference to police officers and the, basically like things like the murder of Laquan McDonald is just completely falsely reported because the police are taking it, at face value until a video is literally, forced to be released by an attorney. So maybe I get, and then there is a lot of literature on the relationship between the Pentagon and Hollywood as an example. So I think it's worth thinking about. I mean, I was the other day I was watching. I couldn't finish it; it was too stupid. But I watched like the first 30 minutes of 21 Jump Street remake, and there are all of these jokes like in the first 25 minutes where they're like, they're bike cops and they're frustrated because it sucks, and they start losing their patience and like threatening to kill people. And they arrest the guy and they forget to read him the Miranda rights because one of the guy's an idiot. And it's like, it's just all of these things that, it's like, is this really like, it could be very funny if it was played as satire, but it's just sort of played as like, man, this is a drag being at the pond. Let's threaten to fucking kill somebody. It's like, really? Like, this is the kind of like pop culture representation of police violence. And, so I think it's a worthy conversation to look at how culture represents, certainly every aspect of, say, broadly speaking, the national security state, from policing to obviously the military, the intelligence world. And I would be shocked if there wasn't, in the same way with the Pentagon and CIA, like larger police departments, like if, the NYPD didn't have liaisons with, different people in the culture and entertainment industry.
Oh, well, I'll tell you this. When we did, when I wrote and shot Beat Cops, we had at least 2 police officers who were advisors. They got paid in cash. And I went to, I got a tour of, I can't remember where it was. It was, I want to say like the 80th precinct or something like that, somewhere in Brooklyn. I can't remember where. I mean, this was now 25 years ago or 20 years ago. But I will say this to, Tom Sharpling had written a tweet to having, portrayed police in a certain way as he was the EP of Monk, and encouraged a contribution. I can't remember where it was, but I followed it on some level. But I have to say, in Beat Cops, John Benjamin and I played cops, and the only other police that you saw in the show threatened to beat us up. So we.
I remember the infamous was it Judy Gold scene?
And there was a Judy Gold scene.
That was funny.
But
wait, I thought she was another cop that threatened to beat you up.
No, she was not. She was in like a UPS delivery.
Oh, okay.
Person.
No, it was Nick DiPaolo.
Nick DiPaolo.
And he was great.
He was not actually that great. We had to cut around.
It was funny watching. You know what's hilarious about Nick DiPaolo is that his most memorable things I've ever seen him do acting wise are the being a cop threatening to beat you up, and then he was in a Chris Rock sketch where he didn't even have any lines. He's just beating a black guy on the ground.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's like his whole shtick is like, hey, you got to treat the cops with respect. Most of my acting gigs are cops that are complete pricks. The funniest, one sign I saw at a protest here was this older gentleman was carrying a "Where's Serpico" sign.
What's this?
It was at one of the demonstrations in the past couple of weeks in New York that I went to. The guy was carrying a "Where's Serpico" sign. I loved it.
He's upstate New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Calling from a 415 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Dan from the Bay Area.
Dan from the Bay Area. What's on your mind, Dan?
So I wanted to clarify something with Michael. I actually really love his Obama impression. And I also wanted to clarify that the David Fry thing with Richard Nixon, you can actually find it on YouTube. But aside from that, I also wanted to talk about how terrible Steven Crowder is and how there's a video of him on Twitter that I think was put up there by the Surfs. And he comes up to this black guy who's essentially just, doing like street mural art on some sort of boarded up business. And you have to find that clip because the black guy basically owns him better than I think anybody else I've seen. And I also, I just wanted to mention that.
All right. Well,
I'm sorry. What's the Richard Nixon thing? What is that?
David Fry. He called in the other day, and we did. We had that on the sheet. I missed that, Brendan.
Yeah, Jamie found it.
Was it Crowder takes exception to him saying like you or your people?
Yeah, he takes exception to him saying you, like, self-righteously, and then questions whether or not this guy's allowed to do street mural art. And then a neighborhood organizer says, yeah, it's fine. And then he calls the cops anyway.
Oh, yeah. Let's find that. Let's do that.
Prick.
Calling from a 240 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Dova from Maryland.
Dova from Maryland. What's on your mind, Dova?
So, as a black leftist, this year has been pretty bittersweet. I was a big Bernie supporter, and it sucked to see how that turned out. But as you guys are well aware, this movement that has emerged has really taken the country by storm, and I feel very inspired by that. But that said, I still have a focus towards electoral politics, and I want to know how you guys think this will affect progressive challengers, not just like the black candidates running, but all of them, because even though the movement isn't partisan or ideological, it's clear that there's a overarching critique that, is relatively in line with what leftists sort of critique the system as. So how do you guys think progressives will be affected by this in their primary challenges? I
got to say, I'm not convinced that it's going to have any discernible impact in terms of, that narrow situation you're talking about. Like, I guess you could argue like what it did do. I think COVID is going to have more impact on these races than anything else, right? Because it undermines the sort of the strength that a progressive challenger has, which is theoretically that they do more on the ground organizing, and they make up for what they lack in terms of money with organizing. Although, then there's also sort of like the random, like, I think it really hurt Elliot Engel when he was caught on a hot mic saying, I'm only here at this protest to address the people in my district about George Floyd's murder because I'm being primaried. That's the only reason why I care. And I think that's pretty revealing, but beyond that, I don't
You literally sounded like my impression of you, to not take us on a tangent. But that was one of the things that was so great about that clip.
What's that?
He literally sounded like my impression of you when he said that.
Well, he had a mask on, so
I only because I have a primary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so in that respect, I mean, it I guess you could argue it has it, but I think weirdly,
I just feel like there's like a newfound sort of focus, or at least awareness of like performativeness and the lack of like actual commitment to the principles that they claim to have. And so it just feels like there's more people aware that a lot of these, like the Democratic mayors, you guys talk about how like people are very well aware, like they are just as guilty in what's happening to a lot of these protesters as, the president. And so I just feel like there is going to be a little more, at least awareness and energy in critiquing and fighting some of these incumbents.
I think though that it's still.
I agree, but I don't think we're gonna see a discernible difference in the short run when we talk about these primaries, because half of them are already over anyways. But
I think that it's still really. I mean, I would read. Cedric Johnson has a piece in Non-Site. I'm forgetting the title, but I'm frequently promoting Cedric Johnson now. I think he's really on target. And he actually did a video a couple of years ago called "Policing Beyond the Technical Fix," which in some ways reminded me. Has some connection to Lester Spence's work, who's been on this show and is another really important scholar. But I think it's still really contested, like where this is actually going. And I agree with you. I think in the grassroots, there's much more seeing of the performativity, and there was the utter amazing, embarrassing spectacle of the kente cloths and everything else. But I think on the political and policy level, where this is actually going, and does it connect to, what I think you're saying, which is the connection between racism, policing, and public goods provisions and redistribution and healthcare and housing. I think that that's still extremely contested, what it's actually going to turn out to be.
2 years, we're going to see more impact 2 years from now from this in terms of electoral, in terms of challenges to incumbents than we will right now.
I think that's very possible. I also think, again, I really, really think that maybe I think there's real progress in some ways, but I wish that the lesson of AOC was more people running for state and city office and town office than so many runs in congressional seats. I mean, I support these candidates, but I think that might have been, I think there could have been a slower buildup in more state and local races before all these congressional races. And the other thing too, that I think to be really mindful of is, especially as it, as you go into the idea of wanting to contest in a lot more districts, I think some of the, just even as an example, like what Sam said earlier about the cop at Saul's school, I think, and I was talking about this on my show last night. I mean, I think it's a very important policy initiative to get. I don't think public safety officers should be from the NYPD in public schools, right? I think that that's an important policy, and at the same time, we can acknowledge that this is a nice person and it's not personalized to her just because she has a profession. And I honestly think, disaggregating between a systemic critique of policing and sort of sometimes kind of just basically kind of individual demonization is actually going to be really tactically important to get this message out to more and more districts.
Yeah. I mean, having a cop in school, I don't know, maybe it says to my son, you need to be protected. And then I think that just creates anxiety. No, frankly.
And that's one of the pushes that are happening in NY in this, it's coming from the city council. I mean, de Blasio is so far resisting it, but police officers should not be in public schools 100%. I just think on a more, kind of optics level, especially because, in fact, one of the ironies is that, obviously so many police officers in major metropolitan areas do come from working class backgrounds. There are a lot of people of color that are cops. And of course, it's a broader institutional critique, but not just a, screw all police type of thing. Again, I don't think it's going to kind of resonate when you're running in a lot of different districts.
All right. So in celebration of the Vic Berger release of the Gutfield Crowder comments.
When did that exchange take place?
I think when did Gutfield and Vic Berger have the exchange?
Yeah,
that happened back in 2017, but Vic Berger released it in the past week as a service to the country. And so Crowder, of course, who has been, I don't know, I guess he went out and he actually left his cave to go out and ask people to convince him that coronavirus is real or whatever it is, change his mind. Here is Steven Crowder out on the streets. This is a clip from a couple of weeks ago. We missed it, and let's play it in honor of the fact that apparently no one at Fox liked him, and he didn't leave. He was basically kicked out the door. But here is Steven Crowder on the streets. Where is he, in Texas or something?
He's in Dallas.
He's in Dallas, and he's approaching a guy who is drawing a mural on a wall. And Crowder, of course, is doing his best to police the area.
And pretend in front of your friends because y'all grouped up and it's 5 white people and y'all want to sit around and talk about black people because they are in the group.
No, I'm just asking you. I think it's good art.
That. Don't be biased.
Well,
don't be a mob. I'm just saying. I don't know if it's you, but it could be you. You got the same.
Well, I don't know if you looted, but it could be you. But I'm assuming it's not.
But we're not here talking about that though. We talking about what the problem is. No, we're not talking about.
I think the problem is rioting and looting.
Is Gabriel looted?
Yeah, I think that's a problem.
Is Gabriel looted?
Is your name Gabriel?
Did you ask me, is Gabriel looted?
Do you mean like Archangel, Great Gabriel?
You never asked me, is Gabriel looted? So that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is
how
do we hold accountability? How do we hold accountability as a nation? That's what's important because that's what's going on. Just like I said, every time your people call
Whoa, that's pretty racist. Don't be racist.
Bro,
don't say your people.
I'm going to tell you what it is.
What if I said your people and said you're all criminals? That's terrible.
What that is, that's a fact.
My people what?
White people your people is the one who's calling the police saying black people. That's not a racist.
I don't call the police and say black people unless a black person commits a crime.
Stop talking for a second. You came to record me.
I was asking about your art.
Stop talking for a second.
Well, no, I'm asking you a question.
No,
if you say you people, I don't think that's racist.
You're not even humble enough to stop talking. How you gonna come to ask black people about what they're going through, but you can't even humble yourself to stop talking?
You've talked most of the time.
You want to waste my time?
I'm not want. I want to know what should we do?
Listen.
I'm listening.
Listen.
Yeah.
Your people, when they call the police on our people.
White people. Okay.
When the white skin complexion call the police on the black skin complexion, they say black people.
Yeah.
So that means that nations need
Some people do.
And that's not a racist
But not all white people.
Just listen, man. Stop interrupting me, please.
Well, you just said you people.
Stop interrupting me, please.
Go ahead.
Your people, white people, is what I said.
Right.
And that's not a racist comment. That's a fact. Because that's what. Stop. Don't interrupt
no, but you're wrong. You're saying racist shit, man.
Don't interrupt me.
You can't say you people do and then say not all white people are the same. Just like not all black people are the same. Not all white people are the same. Just like not all black people are the same. Does the owner know that you're doing this? Did you talk with him about it? Is this art or graffiti?
Pause it for 1 second. Look at that. What a little whiny baby. When the guy says, I'm done talking to you because you keep interrupting me, which he was interrupting, and he kept saying, go ahead, I won't interrupt you. And then he kept interrupting. And the guy says, like, I've had it done of it. Then it's all like, oh, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell on you for painting on the plywood.
What a scumbag. It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing to even watch that.
It is embarrassing to watch it, but we're going to watch more of it.
Oh, all right.
Okay. Is it art or is this your business?
Thank you, bro. Thank you, bro.
Is this your business?
Thank you, bro.
It's not your business?
The interview is over. I'm going to start recording. You keep harassing
me. Is this a business?
Yeah.
Is it your business?
No.
Okay. Let's have someone call the police about if it's to find out if it's a business. What am I bullshitting?
Yeah. Why are you bullshitting?
No, he's not.
allowed to do this. I'm not all over the news.
Because it's private property.
I'm part of
Maybe the business owner is fine with it.
I'm part of the community association.
Okay. What does that mean?
Deep Ellum Community Association.
Is allowing people to paint.
Vice president. We allow busking and we allow murals.
So who's the name of this business owner? What's his name?
I don't know.
It's none of your business.
Is he okay with it? Don't get behind me.
He's been okay with it twice. He's done this twice.
The business owner?
More than once.
He's done this twice.
He's done this twice at the business.
Business is
Y'all see this?
What's the name of the business owner? Who's okay
using
with
his white privilege to try to stop me.
Well, if it's vandalism, I think it's beautiful. But how about this? I'll bring in a canvas. How am I a coward? I just sat there and spoke with you.
You're a coward.
Really?
You can't face me. You're a
I
coward.
spoke to you. I'm not a coward. I spoke to you.
Scumbag.
What a piece of
I can't
garbage.
It's just embarrassing. He can't. And the thing is, he doesn't even.
I'm not a coward. I spoke to you. Look I actually came up to you. You do realize that.
And goes up specifically to race bait and legitimately gets offended with the you people thing. I mean, like, legitimately. It's just pathetic.
Also says that white
What
people
kind of
don't
society
call the
do we
police
live
on
in?
black people, and then proceeds to do that exact
He
thing.
proceeds to do exactly that.
Yes.
My feelings got a little
all
bit
white
hurt.
people call-
So
call
I'm
the
going to
police
go
on you.
try to
No, hold on. I'm going
harass
to go
you.
see if you're doing that correctly. I'm in charge of all of the graffiti. I wonder if how many times Crowder has called the police on white people doing, like a painting somewhere. Are you allowed to paint that house? You see Crowder jumping out of his car every time he sees somebody painting somewhere. Are you allowed to paint there?
What an embarrassing.
Is there any more to this, or is it just like more of him? I'm brave for coming in.
There's 9 more minutes. I can send you the clip if you want to watch.
Oh
the
my
whole thing.
God.
They just go back and forth like this, and Crowder walks away saying that I'm not a coward. Basically.
You know what? I got news for you, Crowder. You are a coward, because that guy does not have 4 million YouTube viewers. So I don't know why you were sitting there debating with him. I thought that was your prerequisite. That is what you told Gavin McGinnis as to what your prerequisite was for addressing people. They need to have 4 million YouTube subscribers before I will sit down with them. Or they need to be black.
What a punk.
Does he? He calls him Stephen Coward? Is that right? Jamie just weighed in. Is that right?
What a scumbag.
That's fantastic.
If he calls him Stephen Coward, can we watch the rest of it?
I was going to say, like, if that guy
all of a sudden took out a pair of socks,
Crowder.
He just takes out a pair of socks. He's like, yeah, because you won't debate Sam Cedar. You're out here calling the police on artists.
God.
Fuck you.
I think I would honestly like just roll up the show and say it's everything that I ever dreamed of happened, and that's all. This is really disturbing. Matt Walsh has weighed in on a very controversial subject, and that is
I like Matt Walsh better than Stephen Crowder.
Yeah, well,
I actually will say that
he goes deep. He goes deep. He's been he
goes deep.
He's stressed the ongoing issue with PC culture and how it impacted Jesus Christ. Yes, that's for real. Let's watch.
Ultimately, Pilate orders Jesus' execution. Why does he do that? And here's the crucial point. Why does Pilate?
He's talking about Pontius Pilate. Back in I guess what would be the year? What year would that be? Would that be 32 AD? I guess, or no, that would be 32. I don't know. Well, somewhere down there, around the time that Jesus died, obviously. But go ahead.
For the execution of Jesus. It's not because Pilate, as the governing authority, is afraid of Jesus or thinks he's an insurrectionist or is a threat to their power. No, it's because the mob demanded. The mob shouted, "Crucify him." Pilate ordered the execution. He did something he knew was wrong, ignoring Roman law, because the mob demanded it. So if there's any lesson here, aside from the theological lessons that can be applied to this current situation in America, it's about mob rule. It's about this is why you don't cave to the mob. This is why governing authorities need to uphold the rule of law. The execution of Jesus was not done in an attempt to uphold the rule of law. It was really done in defiance of the rule of law. It was done because the rule of the mob had supplanted the rule of law. And this is what happens when a governing authority caves to the mob and gives a violent mob whatever they want. You end up executing the Messiah. Okay? That's the real lesson.
It's he.
I muted myself, but you would have heard me. I was just like, wow, that's an escalation.
So is he suggesting that Chauvin is the Messiah? I mean, who's the Messiah in his analogy here, where he's talking about like the mob is demanding police reform here, and you end up killing the Messiah?
Maybe the TV show Cops or Live PD. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
Cops and Live PD are the messiahs of culture. Also, I'd have to say, I mean, Jesus would, I think if I read it correctly, Jesus would, he'd certainly be about, forgiveness and change. And I think he would definitely be out protesting.
And presumably,
for me to say, I don't think Jesus would be sitting around being like,
I mean, I seem to remember that
Jesus would be like, this is how cops get canceled.
But I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not really up on my on Christianity from an academic standpoint, but my understanding is that Jesus went in to the temple and overturned the money changers' tables. Now, if that's not a protest and a infraction against the rule of law, I don't know what is.
Well, the money changers had put out a statement in support of an unruly mob.
Well, I mean, the money changers
bothering Roman soldiers. So Jesus was telling them
the Sadducees
to stop being,
they ran the temple. He didn't like it. He came in and overturned their tables. That's what a protest is, isn't it? That's what he was doing.
No, that's looting.
Yeah, he was doing
destruction of private
it was a looting. Yeah.
The Wendy's.
If you give in to the mob, then you don't get to watch Cops anymore.
Wow, you talk about shoehorning that in, maybe you should try to go for like some type of intermediate example.
Do you remember Steven Seagal's Cop Show?
If you listen to the mob, you kill the Messiah. It's probably, there's got to be something in between that.
I would suggest that there's a lot of gradations there.
If I remember correctly, it was the mob that threw the tea into the Boston Harbor because they were revolting against the rule of law that had been established by the monarchy in England. Who was the Messiah there? Was it the tea or just the taxes on the tea?
No, it was the tea company.
Oh, the tea company.
Yeah, Jesus.
Interesting.
That's pretty clear.
That's fascinating. And I mean, you got to try and come up with something intermediary there, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that was way too much. Everything else he was saying, I totally clocked, but that was such an escalation. That was just like, dude, you gotta, it's like, I don't even know, like, what would that be like, and then if we don't have single payer, then that means that all children aren't covered. And if all children aren't covered, that means that the Hashem might not come. And then the revelation Torah cannot be completed. That's what happens when we don't have single payer.
Really
like
wanted
you gotta
to
just like
shoehorn
hold
that
it
in.
down a little bit. Like you can't go to maximum effect.
Yeah. Calling from a 619 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Calling from San Diego. My name's Alex. Is this me?
Yes, Alex, it's you from San Diego. What's on your mind?
Not too much. Just you can hear me, right? Because I'm on my Bluetooth, and I know that. Just want to make sure that I'm coming through clear.
Oh, I'll tell you if you're not.
Fair enough. No, I was just calling. I lived. I was calling. I have been trying to get through for a while. I was at the protest in La Mesa. So I actually lived in La Mesa up until about a week ago. And was 4 miles from the La Mesa police station, and it was just crazy, just the current narratives and everything that was being spun. Just recently, so when I walked there, I actually was standing in a peaceful, silent crowd when they started firing, tear gas and rubber bullets at us, and that's when windows started breaking, and this narrative is still, they actually released a timeline. The Mesa PD, conveniently released a timeline that a unruly crowd member threw a rock first, and that's what happened, and that's why they started firing on us and started doing all kinds of other shit. But the other reason I wanted to call, so there's been there's been this person, Joe Jorgensen, that's been coming, like, I've seen, like, this libertarian person running that wants to privatize Social Security and wants to privatize a bunch of other shit. And, obviously I really appreciate, what you have to say as far as, dealing with libertarians and their, nonsensical arguments. So on top of, what I had mentioned about being at the protest and everything, if you could break down, the problem with privatizing Social Security, like why that would not be a benefit for people. I think that'd be,
I'll give you an example right now of why that would not be a benefit. 2008. If you had saved up all your life and you were trying to retire in 2008 and you were 65, you would have had to wait almost 10 years to get your funds back. Maybe you'd have to retire when you were 70. You're also putting a lot of fees into the pockets of private financial, advisors. But also you can look to the 401k, which has been a disaster. The 401k was supposed to be a privatized version of Social Security, essentially, where you put your money into a defined, not benefit, but defined contribution fund. And people have pulled their money out. They have not saved. Social Security doesn't give you huge returns, but it gives you guaranteed ones. And it is supposed to be a guarantee, basically an insurance policy for old age, not basically a gambling opportunity. So that's basically it.
Okay. And if it's okay, if I could just say just a couple more things.
Okay.
So, well, first off, I started listening to you. I actually had to unsubscribe from Jimmy Dore after I discovered your channel, just because of all the dumb bullshit that he has been saying. But I just want to obviously thank you guys. I listen to you guys every morning when I'm driving. I'm a delivery driver, and when the COVID-19 shit started, just being able to listen to you and just to find my resources, just to have some actual truth, has just been a huge benefit. And also, if I could just encourage everybody, I'm actually taking this Friday off for Juneteenth, and I want to encourage everybody to, any of your listeners, to also try to take the day off. I, as an American citizen, didn't even know what Juneteenth was until last Wednesday. And frankly, that infuriated me that my educational system has completely screwed an entire generation, multiple generations of just people to not have any understanding what that is. So I just wanted to, just encourage other people. I've heard some people are going to be doing a general strike, and, to go out and support, if you find a black-owned restaurant, black-owned business, go out there and spend your money there this Friday. And, that's about it, and just to say thank you, just to what you guys do. And I really appreciate it.
Appreciate the call, Alex. Thanks for the nice words.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
This is encouraging. The Data for Progress did a poll. Elliot Engel down by double digits against his race with Elliot Engel.
Wow.
I don't know if you can get an absentee ballot now via the website in New York City. There's some confusion on that, but look for it. You can still also vote in person. And I think you can also do early voting as well. So you got to check the New York City Board of Elections as to where you can do that. But
there's great candidates to vote for, like Bowman and Semela. Lopez. I think Isaiah James. I like Lauren Ashcroft in that race, and I definitely still think it's worth voting for Bernie in the primary.
Yes. Mondaire Jones.
I think he's definitely in contention. I mean, some of these are heavier lifts than others, but he's in play.
He was running against Nita Lowey, and she dropped out of the race, or basically decided to retire. Let's see.
I think there's also one other. Okay, yeah, I think this is local. There's a socialist Haitian candidate running in the 57th Assembly District named Farah Souffrant. There's a piece on her in Haiti Liberté, which I really enjoy. Haiti Liberté is a great site if you want to get a left and historical perspective on Haiti, and they did a great profile of her.
Let's go. Here's Tucker Carlson talking about how his viewership has gone up on the right-wing Fox News because he's been very vocal about speaking for white rights.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Last night we did something we don't do very often. We spent the entire first block of the show on a single topic. We told you about Black Lives Matter. We told you what Black Lives Matter believes. We told you what the group plans to do to our country as they amass unprecedented amounts of power. The segment went on for nearly 20 minutes, and by the standards of
what does that mean? That Black Lives Matter has amassed unprecedented amounts of power. How much power would that be? That they have amassed unprecedented amounts of power.
Street renaming rights, maybe. I don't know. Painting streets.
That's right. You have a mayor that's painted a street, and there is finally at least talk of renaming military bases, not against our enemies who lost or something like that. But continue.
The segment went on for nearly 20 minutes, and by the standards of this business, it was probably way too long. There was a lot to say. But in the end, a lot of people saw it. The show turned out to be the most watched hour of primetime television in the country yesterday. It outrated everything else: cable and broadcast, news, entertainment, and sports. And we never talk about ratings, and we're definitely not telling you this to brag about it. There's already more than enough bragging in television, that's for sure. In any case, nothing in television lasts forever. Next week, we'll probably get beaten by a 3 a.m. re-air of Gilligan's Island or a 4-hour Love Boat retrospective. That'll probably happen. The point of telling you this is to remind you that you are not alone. You may feel like you are. Suddenly, your opinions qualify as crimes. Dare to say what you think at work, and you will be fired in the middle of a recession. Write what you think online, and you will be silenced by the big tech companies. So you keep your views to yourself. You have no choice. A lot of Americans are doing that right now. They're staying quiet. And of course, that's the point of censorship, to keep people isolated and alone, to prevent a consensus from forming that challenges those in charge. If you're forced to shut up, they can do what they want to you and your country. That's why they do it. But last night's show suggested they have not yet succeeded, though they're trying. Millions and millions of Americans agree with you. You are not crazy. Your views are not evil. What is happening to this country right now is completely and totally wrong. And that will be obvious to everyone someday when our French Revolution has ended.
What a
I wonder
drama
who the they he keeps referring to. Because the they in his calculation are not American citizens, right? Because he's talking to American citizens. You, everybody I'm talking to, are American citizens. They are trying to do something to our country. Not the our that involves the they. Our involves you. And it was about they, the Black Lives Matter supporters. I mean, first off, the numbers that he garnered, I have no doubt. There's just not that many primetime outlets for the type of white supremacy that he has. And so they congregate and watch his show. But he's going on. I mean, this is the game he's playing. He's trying to create this silent majority that exists. And frankly, it does not exist. It's quite evident it does not exist. You nearly need to look at the polling to see how people think that Donald Trump is handling these things, to know that the calculation that he's making, this is not 1968. Donald Trump is not Richard Nixon. Our America is not the same in a myriad of ways as it was in 1968.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, he's talking directly to white people. And this is the same message that Crowder was putting out yesterday, too. Like, the polling doesn't show how, because you have censored us. This is the entire, this is their banner right now. This is the way that they get their people, motivated by, ramping up the grievance. And in this instance, it's white grievance.
Yeah, it's a lot of kind of, Travis Bickle sort of vibe. I think that, and I would caution, like, I don't think the new silent majority is necessarily super left, but it is not right. Like that's the reality, is that the center gravity is getting redefined in some very key ways. And I'd also say, I don't want to, Noam Chomsky had some really interesting, he's opposed to any form of censorship on public or private platforms, full stop, and has a very substantive view of free speech, which I definitely agree with. But one of the things that I thought was interesting historically was he's just like, look, I don't agree with any form of censorship in private. And he told a terrifying story, actually, of a book he published in the 70s. The owner, the publishing house was owned by a larger conglomerate. Somebody in the board of directors of the conglomerate saw an ad for the book, didn't like it, and demanded it be pulled. The publisher refused, and he went about basically pulping the entire company. It was an extraordinary story. So Chomsky, but he's like, look, the only reason this is in play right now is because it's happening to the right. Now, from his perspective, it shouldn't happen to anybody, which I agree. But he's just like, this has happened to the left for decades. And another reason the left shouldn't get so into this is because don't have any mistake about where this is ultimately going. Like, the fact that Tucker can say this with a straight face while his most famous viewer is the president of the United States reveals the whole game.
Yes. And, we were actually, Matt and Brendan and I were talking about this before the show today, that the structure of government and private censorship has not changed. The mechanisms have not changed. It's just that it used to be you would be censured and you would be excommunicated if you spoke out about the country club's policy of not admitting black people.
Right. That's right. Exactly. That's exactly the point.
If you, it's just, and I don't know. And I think that, like, look, I think we are living in an age of not excess of censorship. It's just that where the needle has pointed is different than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And 20 or 30 years ago, those who were subjected to this type of, censorship, if you want to call it that, or shaming or, shut down by the mechanisms in which people print, I think there's a lot less, obviously, than there was, because there's a bar to entry that is lowered. Now, you could argue that Facebook and Google are sort of like raising that bar in some fashion. I think there's some truth to that from where it was, let's say 5-10 years ago. But it really is just a function of, this gets back to that same notion of like white people are losing their privilege. I mean, this broadly speaking, the same similar dynamic. White people are losing their privilege, and they perceive that as an attack on their rights. And in fact, I think, the reality is that there's going to be overcompensation in society in times like this, no doubt whatsoever. But let's be clear on where the real power continues to lie. And so
and from my perspective, I would just say, I think that and what I like so much about Chomsky's perspective, because it's my perspective, is that, don't allow very, very, very important arguments about open culture, speech, and the deeper history here and the real political implications of this stuff to get weaponized by grievance merchants. Like there's a reason to support this stuff and hold pretty absolutist positions on this stuff that has a historical sweep and implicates other areas like corporate power, like foreign policy, on which there is no significant change of power. In fact, you could argue, I would actually argue in some ways, sort of mainstream news attacking of those institutions is less than it was, say, in the 70s. I mean, you don't have Seymour Hersh working for the New York Times. And even there, I'm always reminded of Mark Ames having this incredible piece about how Seymour Hersh, after exposing My Lai, exposing the CIA, sets out to expose this secretive financial conglomerate in the 70s that has ties to the mafia, that is monopoly power across every kind of major sector in the United States. And the piece lands with a whimper, basically, because even unlike the CIA and the Pentagon, even with all their power and all of their sinister relationship to democracy, at the end of the day, they're still respecting FOIA requests. They're not using lawyers to shut them down.
Right.
Whereas this private company is saying, we will bankrupt the New York Times. We will destroy you. We will put private detectives on you. And that's actually much more the world we're in today. So it's important to just keep all these variables in mind and do not allow very serious conversations about censorship in the press to just get reduced to right-wing whining. That's not where the action is.
What did Chomsky say anything about Cotton's op-ed?
He doesn't think it should have been withdrawn.
He doesn't think it should have been withdrawn.
No, he doesn't. He's not. He's that's not where his politics are. He doesn't think it should have been withdrawn. I think that the Cotton thing, though, that's interesting to me is like what the most compelling part of that argument to me was like, did they even read this before the thing got submitted?
Well, no. I mean,
right.
That's why Bennett's out. I mean, he didn't read it.
Right.
And the idea is that, do you have a responsibility on these op-ed pages to do any even like rudimentary fact checking? Or do you just allow someone who's a senator to go out there and use the pages of your newspaper to lie? From my perspective, it's like, no, you don't. There's no compulsion any more than, the paper has a responsibility to print what I say.
I mean, on the other hand, I gotta say though, like it makes sense because we're in media conversations, but the speed at which that whole thing became a drama about the New York Times editorial page versus, I'd like to know if a United States senator who is a serious presidential contender wants to physically attack protesters.
You know what you do if you're the New York Times?
Absolutely.
You do a reported piece on it.
Absolutely.
You
don't let, intelligence people and military people go on background so easily and help shape the story, by the way, which is a bigger structural critique of the New York Times, which I think people should be much more invested in. I think him writing that piece, I appreciate it. I wanted to, even down to the Tom Wolfe citation. It was like, wow, I really get this guy's mindset. I know the enemy here.
Yes.
And he's going to run for president.
He's done that too. And what I guess, and I wonder also, did Chomsky weigh in on what Twitter has been doing to Tom Cotton? Here's Tom
not
Cotton.
going
Wait.
to- okay. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Welcome to the story that just won't go away. After his New York Times op-ed titled "Send in the Troops" caused an uproar among staffers, an editor lost his job. He resigned as the editorial page editor. Senator Tom Cotton now says the newspaper isn't the only one who was trying to censor him, and maybe is. A new FoxNews.com op-ed, he writes this: "The Twitter thought police also targeted me for expressing an opinion shared at that time by the majority of Americans." Joining us now with more, Arkansas GOP Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, Twitter threatened to stop your account in its tracks?
Yeah, Brian, that's exactly right. I can reveal now for the first time what happened a couple weeks ago. You know, I'd come on this program a couple Mondays ago, and we talked about the rioting and the looting and the need, if necessary, to use military to back up our police where they were outnumbered by these rioters and looters and anarchists. Apparently, that didn't sit well with the Twitter thought police. So one of their low-level employees in Washington, D.C. just contacted my office out of the blue and said, "You have to delete these tweets in 30 minutes or we're going to permanently lock your account." Now, we asked for an explanation of why that was. It was not really forthcoming. They cited a policy that didn't explain or apply to my situation. We sent them back some clear evidence of my meaning on Twitter, and then they said, well, we're going to consider this. And we waited them out. We called their bluff for 30 minutes. They didn't lock down my account, and then within about 2 hours, they finally got back to us and said, okay, you can keep your post up. But it was a very Star Chamber-like procedure, I have to say, in which they were just calling us out of the blue, demanding that we censor my own tweets or that they would censor my entire account.
So, in other words, they actually gave you an opportunity to respond, unlike in every instance, like in every video that I put out last week is demonetized. There's no opportunity to respond to YouTube. That you have people who get their accounts locked from them every single day across the spectrum, left, right, maybe not center, but maybe center. Who knows? So in other words, they afforded you a privilege and an opportunity that no one else gets.
I'm sure that that he's super concerned about Twitter screwing around with Nicolas Maduro's account and other foreign heads of state that the United States is mounting coups on. I mean, this is one of the things I found I appreciate so much about Chomsky is like, yeah, I think there's principles at stake in some of these things, and I think they're really serious, but just the endless, like, none of the people talking about this stuff believe in this stuff. I mean, don't forget, the whole context of him whining about this is because he's calling to unleash federal troops to crush people exercising their democratic rights. I mean, it's got to be like 2% of the population that actually holds firm on this stuff.
Right.
And we should. But the deployment of it by a actual existing authoritarian, like a thoroughgoing, full-fledged authoritarian. That's what Tom Cotton is. Tom Cotton is a actual authoritarian.
I've been saying for a long time.
And he's going to run for president.
Yes.
And the great thing about it is that he has, the charisma of a
he's trash.
He's like a sort of laundromat guy who steals your clothes or something.
I mean,
I don't even know. He's repulsive.
It's hard to know.
Going out on television and saying,
well,
it was like the Star Chamber, look, and don't censor his tweets. He's a friggin' senator. Look, I want, especially Twitter as a platform. There is something terrifying and clarifying about knowing that, these people's sort of inner monologue, even mediated by social media PR. But you are going to talk about the Star Chamber while you're literally calling for a form of martial law on demonstrators? Are you effing kidding? I mean, of course he's not kidding.
The Australian, that caller has started off talking about Paw Patrol. One, yes, so much entertainment is pro-cop propaganda. Think about how many cop shows there are. Two, it sounded to me like the answer to his question is pretty much you have to ask the parents of black kids what they've been saying to their kids for generations. Winnipeg Craig. Any thoughts, Michael, any thoughts on the terminally online people who were calling Chomsky a liberal when he originally suggested voting for Biden in the general election?
Boring.
Sam, you're missing the best part of the Crowder clip. He calls the black guy racist when the black guy says he's got a fake Clark Kent haircut and says he's calling the cops. Jonathan Armstead, Sam, thanks for covering how dumb
Stephen
Aubrey
Crowder
Huff
so
is.
desperately wants to be a victim of racism.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
What's wrong with this guy?
He's been one of the dumbest Trump supporters in recent years. This is Aubrey Huff he's referring to. He's even gone as far as saying he's going to run against Governor Newsom because California has become a state of soy boys. As a baseball fan, I think this is great, as Huff was notoriously bad at running. People should look for a video of Manny Ramirez, the Boston Red Sox, catching a ball in the outfield, high-fiving a fan in the stands, and then throwing back to first to catch Huff in a rare outfield double play. That's how dumb he is. Jet Junkie, Paw Patrol is fascist propaganda. I actually think there is something to that. Teacher Lauren, hey, Sam, just wanted to let New York voters know that if they did not apply for their absentee ballot for the primary, early voting is in progress now. They can check their county board of elections site for polling locations. A Square, Sam, Gorsuch establishing poll position, also setting up bad scores decisions later, but I will take the good today, indeed. Behold my caucus. My God, what the hell are they going to do when Soros dies? Will it be his ghost controlling the world? Overturning money changers' tables, dumping tea into the harbor. These were shameful attacks on property. Definitely should have been shot.
I have to say, I watched an interview with George Young. He's the guy that they did Blow based off of, Johnny Depp, that movie about the guy from Boston who gets connected with the Colombian cartels.
Okay.
He just got released from prison a couple years ago. And I mean, he is a riot because especially if you're from Mass, because he is just like a guy from Weymouth who almost sort of looks like a hippie founding father at this point. And he was giving this talk, almost like a TED talk. And he's just like, he had his interpretation of the tea dumping at Boston Harbor is just like, because the tea merchants were cutting in on Adam's bootlegging interests or something. It was hilarious.
Yes. Oh,
just
yeah.
like,
No, that,
it's true.
Who writes about that is Hayes wrote about that in a colony.
Oh, in a colony. Yeah.
In a colony.
Yeah. And Young's just like, I won't even do the accent because he really has it, but he's just like, being an outlaw is American. And, he's being self-justifying, but he's totally right. It's another weird thing about this country, this combination of serious worship of uniforms and authority, and then like romanticizing of rebelling against it.
You can find that, like, go to Italy. You want to talk about romanticizing uniforms?
Sure.
Calling from a 678 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's DJ from Gwinnett. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing, DJ? What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I'm just calling to sort of go back on this on yesterday's episode in regards to Nabila Islam's race in Georgia House District 7.
Yeah.
I recall sort of Nomiki talking about the race as if it wasn't for COVID, perhaps Nabila could have won or made the runoff. Whereas I live in the district, I can assure you, Nabila, her issue was mainly that she was not on the ground. She was hardly knocking on doors. She ran mostly an online campaign. And it sort of made me sort of want to bring light to certain issues that I have with certain progressive campaigns, making sure that they're actually knocking on doors, not trying to take on the aesthetic.
But wait a second. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that was not a function of, you think she wasn't doing it prior to COVID, in other words?
Yeah, no, she wasn't. The candidate who actually got second place in that race, who almost made the runoff, was Brenda Lopez. She's been knocking on doors since May of 2019.
Okay.
Nabila just got back to the district after working for the DNC. And for whatever reason, decided not to knock on doors, which rubbed me the wrong way. And honestly, I voted for Brenda over Nabila because of that issue. If you're not going to get to know your constituents after being gone for like almost 4 years, then how are you going to properly represent them? How do we know you're going to have a good constituent services in the district? Whereas Brenda Lopez, while I disagree with her when it came to issues like healthcare, like she was for public option. She was at least for a Green New Deal and was at least for Elizabeth Warren's plan when it came to dealing with student loan debt. But I mean, I've heard some rumblings here and there about certain campaigns from progressive candidates not being on the ground. And that is an issue to me. And that is a way to that is actually the only way to really get your name out there. And Brenda didn't have nearly as much money as Nabila, but still outperformed her because of that. And Nabila, go on.
No, I mean, I think I think most people who were supportive of her candidacy would be disappointed to know that. I mean, I think one of the problems, one of the difficult things is you have national organizations to really get a sense of what's going on the ground. You more often than not, you're relying on the candidates themselves to give you a report on what they're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just let this be like a warning to I guess progressive candidates who are or want to be progressive candidates who are listening. Knock on doors.
Maybe there's another good lesson for starting more local too, because you can sort of build up that capacity. You run for city council, you run for state rep, you can start to, because I'm sure the intention was to be I don't think anybody sets out and says, I mean,
we're going to have a bad ground.
Yeah, we're not going to do any door knocking. We're going to, maybe, right, I hope not, right. But I do think there is some actual, this is another thing. There's so much rejection of politics as it's been done for correctly in so many ways, but there is actually some institutional and knowledge built up from learning get out the vote operations, learning how to knock on doors and things like that, which I think a lot of which are still built up at a very local level to the extent that's possible. And I think it's something worth looking at,
And that's true, but also have to consider that Stacey Abrams, when she ran for governor, actually won the 7th district, which Carolyn Bordeaux, who is the Democratic nominee who ran in 2018, couldn't even get over the top. So now we're dealing with what we had in 2018 over again. And maybe she'll do it this time. I don't know. But having that sort of inspirational grassroots campaign is important, especially if you're going to be that sort of firebrand progressive candidate.
Right.
And I've worked on campaigns in Gwinnett County where our main thing was knocking on doors, no matter how much money we raised. That was our main thing, and we've won. And I don't know, I don't understand. And she's talked to people who have done that, and for some reason they didn't register. Well, but yeah, I just thought I'd sort of make light of that.
Appreciate the call. Thank you, DJ. All right, let's take one more phone call.
I just want to say, if anybody from the Nabila campaign has a different perspective, you can call in too.
Yes. Calling from a 226 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 226. 226 going once. 226 going twice. Gone. Sorry about that.
Not good.
Stinks to be on hold and then have that go. Calling from a 650 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Terry from Santa Barbara.
Terry from Santa Barbara. You are the final call of the day. What can I do for you?
Well, I just want to share a fun little story with a group chat between some friends, and how we got into a discussion about the Black Lives Matter movement, and the one guy was displeased about the comparison of cops to Nazis, and at one point he said I don't think Jewish people would appreciate you using that or using that comparison, and then also said basically yelled in chat it's not like we're gassing people and then that evening I found I stumbled upon a post about a Jewish lady, a Holocaust survivor, actually, a post about a Holocaust survivor stopping at a protest and just being like, yeah, they're all like, they all suck, like the cops suck or whatever.
Right.
He drove to the protest
and
and showed her number through the window.
Yeah.
And basically was like, obviously I can't get out, can't whatever, but, keep going.
And then I also saw a post about how there's an ICE detention facility, concentration camp that's spraying a viral disinfectant, like repeatedly over and over again in LA. And then the next day
burns on.
I posted this to the. Yeah, it's causing people to cough up blood, and I'd be surprised if it hasn't killed somebody already. But I then posted those to the chat, and then I just like, hey, look at this, and then he was just like, don't you guys miss when this was like a fun chat where we could just like not worry about stuff? And that just gave me immense satisfaction. Like, okay, so you just can't talk about anything.
Yeah, I appreciate the call. I mean, look, the Nazis and everything that happened, particularly in the context of the Holocaust in World War II, was not just, didn't exist just at the end, right? Like there were intermediary steps. And I don't know at what point you cross the threshold where you are, a Nazi as opposed to a Nazi. In other words, they started off doing stuff that is not terribly dissimilar than we see in our society. It's just that at one point in our society, it doesn't go any further. But is it just simply where we were at the end of the Holocaust that is what a Nazi is, or is it the intermediary steps? At what point at threshold do people appreciate that, like, what's happening now by our government may not be determinate where it ends, but it's certainly similar to where these things begin. So, all right, let's take a couple IMs and then we'll get out of here. 10 lawn gnomes. How does the SCOTUS ruling impact states with at-will employment? Wouldn't they just find some other ordinarily mundane excuse? Well,
yes.
Yes, in the same way that they would for anything else. But it also may change the presumption. You may have to actually, it can make it easier to bring an action against an employer in that situation.
Joanna Beast has a great new piece in The Nation about this in terms of substantively building off of that decision.
Rave Dubin, I love the idea of MR Carpenter pencils. How do you vacuum up sawdust? I just use a one of those wet dry vacs, but I've been thinking about doing something more serious because I'm getting a little worried about it. Festool has a beautiful shop vac, but it's like $700 or something. That's a lot of money to spend on a shop vac.
That is extraordinary amount of money to spend on that. Yes.
But it is.
I'm glad you realized that, Sam.
My neighbor has a Festool track saw, and he said that, which I also have been pining after, and apparently that also costs like, I don't know, like $1,000 or something, so it's not happening, but it sucks up about 90% of the sawdust. But you got to be careful. That's how come I had an N95 mask, actually. Brendan, mark that down. MR Carpenter pencils.
Yep.
Tim Pulitzer. I think we're seeing a lot more grifting this election cycle, and it's not that hard to understand why. Dave Rubin, Candace Owens, Tim Pool, and Jimmy Dore have shown just how easy it is to make money by appealing to the dumbest people in society. Shouldn't be surprised that some would use their left credentials to try and get a slice of that pie, too. It's unfortunate, but I think we should have expected it. Maybe we need a weekly opportunist takedown segment. Oh, that's a good idea. That could be pretty fun. Really cool. I'm not a coward. I'm speaking at you, Cold Feet Crowder. Rachel was right. Aubrey Huff is so interested in seeing the smiling faces of cashiers, but not interested in protecting them from COVID. Get out of here, a-hole. Sasha B. All the Gorsuch ruling on LGBTQ rights does is give everyone the opportunity to be effed over by corporations, regardless of their gender. I don't think that's quite the case, but at least there is some equal footing. Kowalski from Nebraska. Hey, Sam, I've got some bad news. Polish Days 2020 has been postponed. I'll keep you updated when more are available. Details are available. If you want to embrace your possible Polish heritage, you can simulate it by drinking clear grain alcohol and eating pierogi while a German and Russian try and seize your home. Anyway, got to say to anyone that didn't see the post-game interview on TMBS, missed out. Big, great interview. Also want to say we had our Republican State Convention online back on the 6th, and it went off without a single problem. It confounds me that we can't get a convenient convention online in 10 weeks while the Democrats in Iowa can't get an app to work, knowing all the variables years in advance. Don't know if it's a party problem or in Iowa, but as a Nebraskan, I'm obligated to hate on Iowa. Stay safe, everyone. All right, 3 more of these. DC Doc Naps. Just signed up for an annual membership. Just my way of repaying the MR crew for the education you guys have provided me over the years. Thank you for that. Was only able to do this now because my employment payments are greater than my actual pay. Also, inhaled air contains 21% oxygen, less than 1% CO2, while exhaled air contains 13 to 16% higher and 4 to 5% CO2, even though there's a substantial increase in CO2. Rebreathing the 13.16% oxygen is how people are able to swim underwater. So Jesus had to die for us to be forgiven for our sins. Ryan Cole, Jesus, blessed are the meek, for they shall. Matt Walsh, what about the strong? Strong lives matter. Stephen Crowder to Jesus, do you have permission to speak here? Stalemate, great show today.
That's a good one.
Learned a lot. Antifa killed my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Who knew? And the final I am of the day. Jesus went into Jerusalem knowing what would happen. The whole passion is basically him committing suicide by cop in order to become the Messiah. Okay, folks, make sure you tune in on Friday. AOC will be here talking about her primary. That will be taking place on Tuesday. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want. But I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my